Jamie Goode, and in this film I'm going to show you how wine is made. Wine's such an interesting drink. It's probably the most natural of all alcoholic beverages because within them grapes have pretty much everything you need to produce this stuff, wine. The main thing they've got is sugar. Around 210 grams a litre of sugar in a grape that's destined to be used to make wine. And the yeast convert this sugar through a process of fermentation into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And that's what makes wine the drink it is. But it also has other things in it. For instance, it's got acidity that provides balance, and that comes from the grapes. And the flavour compounds that make wine taste so interesting. Some of them come directly from the grapes, others come from flavour precursors present in the grapes, but then transformed by the action of yeasts into things that are more interesting. And then the yeasts themselves make lots of the flavour compounds in wine. So the great thing about grapes is that you don't really need anything more to produce a sound, drinkable wine. Of course, in modern wineries, it's quite common to add a lot more to the grapes as you process them, but these aren't flavours. These are things that help make the wine more stable, like sulfur dioxide, or their processing aids, or their fining aids, or their nutrients to help the yeasts grow and function better. But you don't actually need to do any of this. So one of the critical decisions, I guess you'd call it the first step in winemaking, is deciding when to pick the grapes. And this is a very important choice. As grapes ripen, the sugar levels rise, the acid diminishes, and all the other flavour compounds kind of, in their own way, kind of reach the right point where they've got the potential to make a really delicious wine. And so the key thing is to be able to track this ripeness, and hopefully, all being well, all these different sorts of ripenesses, which winemakers call them flavour ripeness, physiological ripeness, sugar ripeness, they'll all be kind of meshing together at the right sort of time so that the potential for making a really interesting wine exists.
I will put it.
So once the grapes are picked, they're brought to the winery, ideally as fast as possible. And it's really also a kind of good thing to pick the grapes when they're cool, like early in the morning, or sometimes even at night. Because once you're processing warm grapes, you have the potential to lose quality. When the grapes get to the winery, what happens next depends largely on whether you're intending to make a red wine or a white wine. For white wines, the grapes are pressed immediately. And what that means is that the juice inside the grapes is squeezed out. So the skins and the juice are separated, and then the fermentation takes place just with the juice. For red wines, fermentation is on the skins, and so it's a very different approach.
It is a real pleasure to work with.
It is Nadiza.
But let's begin with whites. The press cycle usually takes a few hours. Grapes are pressed and the juice is taken out. And when you see the juice, often it's this murky brown colour. It doesn't look very good, but fermentation cleans all that up. I should add that it's normal practice to take the grapes directly from the vineyard into the winery and process them. Grapes aren't washed before processing. It's the fermentation process that will make the wine microbiologically sound and fit to drink. The juice is then put in a fermentation vessel. Now, this could be a stainless steel tank, it could be a concrete tank, or it could be a barrel. And fermentation takes place with or without the addition of cultured yeasts. Many winemakers now choose to use the yeasts that are present in the vineyard on the skins of the grapes, and then when the grapes are pressed, those yeasts are then present in the must. And if all being well, those native yeasts, or those indigenous yeasts, will be able to carry out the fermentation. But often winemakers will choose to add cultured yeast just to have some control over this process, Depending on the temperature of the ferment and whether there's any temperature control, fermentation can take anything from a few days to a few months. After fermentation finishes, the yeasts that carried out the fermentation die and fall to the bottom of the vessel. These dead yeasts are called lees, and managing the lees is a really important choice in white wine making. The wine will be ready to bottle anything from 4 months to a year or two after fermentation. Some wines are bottled a little bit earlier, some wines are bottled a bit later, but generally speaking, it's that sort of 4 months to a year after fermentation is finished that the wine is ready for bottling. And for white wines, it's quite normal to stabilize the wine, to add fining agents, and then to filter it so that the bottled wine is clear and bright and free from any haze and will be stable on its journey from the winery to the consumer. But some people choose not to do any of these and just bottle the wine without any further processes. For red wines, the big difference is that fermentation takes place in the presence of the skins. So the juice and the skins are mixed together during fermentation. This process is called maceration. After the bunches are harvested, it's quite common for them to be sorted, so a moving table will be used and people will look at the bunches and take out any bunches or any grapes that are damaged or rotten. This is particularly important for red wines because the skins and the juice are in contact for quite a long time. After the sorting process, if that's done, it's normal to destem the grapes so that what you're left with is whole berries. And then sometimes those berries will be crushed a little bit to release juice and to aid the start of the fermentation process. In other cases, the bunches are left intact, and so some or all of the fermentation vat will consist of whole bunches of grapes. This is a stylistic choice. Once fermentation starts, the carbon dioxide that's released by the yeasts raises the cap of skins to the top of the vessel. Now, if this was left unattended, the cap would dry out and it would be an ideal place for acetic acid bacteria to grow and create a problem called volatile acidity, a vinegary smell that comes from the presence of certain acids. So normally there's some form of cap management. The extraction of colour and flavour from the skins during the maceration process is a major decision point in red winemaking. And also the time of maceration is quite important as well. Sometimes it can be shorter, sometimes longer. There are lots of choices being made at this stage, and a smart winemaker will be making good calls based on the fruit and the wine style in question. When it comes to pressing, this is a really important stage as well. So what happens is that the wine that's not kind of caught up in the skins is drawn off, and then this mass of wine-infused skins is taken and put in a press, and it's squeezed to get as much wine out as possible, but not squeezed too much. If you squeeze too much, then you risk breaking the seeds that are still there present after fermentation, and if those are broken, they can release bitter compounds into the wine, which is not desirable. After pressing, then the wine is usually recombined, or sometimes the pressings are kept separate. And then it's time for aging. And for red wines, aging is commonly done in barrels. If those barrels are new, then they'll contribute some flavour to the wine. But increasingly, winemakers are using other forms of élevage, which is the term for bringing the wine up, such as using larger format oak, focusing on using older barrels that don't impart flavour, and also alternative methods for aging the wine, including concrete, and in some cases terracotta amphora are used. Then after the aging process, which might be maybe 6 months, or it could be as long as 2 years, the wine is ready to be blended together and then bottled. And at this stage, sometimes winemakers will choose to filter the wine to make sure that it's bright and clear and that there aren't any residual microbes left in the wine that might cause trouble later on. Or they might choose to bottle the wine without any filtration. And another process commonly used for red wines is called fining. This is when various fining agents are introduced into the wine that kind of grab hold of some of the tannins, which are the astringent compounds, and remove them from the wine just to make the wine a little bit softer and a bit more polished. Again, that's an optional choice. This is just a brief introductory look at the winemaking process. There are lots of different variations on these various themes, just as there are lots of different styles of wine. But this should hopefully serve as a quick, brief introduction into the sorts of things that happen in wineries, transforming grapes into wine.